Hello and welcome to my easy to understand guide to Wateraid, a set TV advert for A-level media studies on the Educas exam board. If Wateraid comes up as a set text on the A-level Component 1 exam, it will either be as a representation question in comparison to an unseen product that they will give you in the exam, or it will be stepped questions in the audience part of Section B, Component 1. This video is going to focus on representation in Wateraid, and I will do another video about audiences for Wateraid, so check that out if you want to know more. If Wateraid comes up as a representation question in Section A, Component 1 of the A-level exam, then it will always be in comparison to another media product that they give you, such as a print advert, a TV advert, a music video, film poster, or newspaper front cover or article. So it's worth having a look at a range of other products and seeing if you can compare and contrast the representations in Wateraid to any of those kinds of products. If representation does come up for Wateraid, then it is highly likely that it's going to be something like representation of gender, representation of ethnicity, or representation of an issue such as poverty or drought within countries that fall within Africa. I think it's important to be able to look at a variety of different types of representation within Wateraid because we really don't know what's going to come up for it. We often see representations that are quite negative in terms of ethnic minorities. A lot of charity adverts tend to represent people in quite a vulnerable, weak, sympathetic manner. Especially when they are based in places within Africa, we often see people suffering from famines, droughts, poverty, and the representations often show them as quite needy and show people living in these areas as needing help from people within Britain in order to have a better life. And so this very much ties in with Paul Gilroy's ideas about post-colonialism being evident in the media. But the Claudia Sings advert for Wateraid doesn't really do that. It's not showing people within Africa to be desperately needy. It's not showing them in a tragic or vulnerable position. It's not encouraging us to feel desperately sorry for them. It's encouraging us to, as an audience, to see them as empowered and a part of a big community. And so this advert challenges Gilroy's ideas about ethnicity and representation of ethnicity. One of the reasons why this was done was that the charity Wateraid discovered during research that a lot of audiences had become desensitised to typical charity adverts that had come in previous decades. So when audiences had seen Red Nose Day appeals, Comic Relief, Children in Need, they had over time started to get quite bored of those quite tragic, vulnerable, sad, tear-jerking representations that were so commonplace. And this ties in quite nicely with Gerbner's cultivation theory, the idea that audiences were becoming desensitised over time because of these repeated exposures to these quite sad, tragic representations. And so Wateraid deliberately decided to represent Claudia and the rest of her community in a much more positive and strong way. Claudia seems a very friendly, positive young girl. We often see close-ups of her smiling and laughing, and indeed the rest of her community we see in shots showing them all together, which encourages us to see them as part of one big happy community. There's lots of facial expressions and body language that shows that they're all having fun together, they're united, and they work together as part of a team. There are some shots, however, which are very loosely framed, which means there's a lot of space around Claudia. She looks quite small within the frame. And sometimes directors and producers use these type of shots to make somebody seem isolated or lonely or vulnerable. So we do get some shots that perhaps represent Claudia as being more vulnerable and isolated. And this might tie into typical representations of people from African third world countries. It also might tie into representations of women seeming quite vulnerable and weak. Could also relate to representations of age as well. She's supposed to be a child, although it's not clear how old she's supposed to be. So representing her as being quite vulnerable and small within the frame is quite a typical representation of children, and perhaps that's there to play on the audience's emotions and make us feel a little bit of sympathy and protectiveness towards her. In terms of representation of age, have a look at some of the children within the shots in Wateraid. The younger children, we do see some of them playing on swings and having fun together, laughing. But then what happens is we cut to shots of Claudia walking past these children and going to collect water. And so perhaps the message is that in this particular country, young people are having to grow up very fast. Childhood doesn't last very long, and that perhaps as you get older, particularly as a girl, you are expected to start doing more adult work and take on more adult responsibilities. Claudia is seen in a reasonably typical way in terms of her femininity, wearing a skirt and a top, and they are in quite typically feminine colours as well, so pale pinks, whites, blues, and so her appearance might be quite typically feminine. We also see a lot of women within the advert doing what could be considered quite typically female activities. So there's women doing laundry and cooking, doing childcare. And so perhaps the representations of women are quite stereotypical. Some countries within Africa do have some quite old-fashioned gender stereotypes still within their societies, where women really are typically expected to do the vast majority of the domestic work, whilst the men go out and work within the fields doing the heavier lifting and more manual labour. This advert might reflect Van Zoonen's theory that women are often shown within domestic roles. We see Claudia collecting water, we see other women doing laundry and cleaning and childcare within the advert. Bell hooks might suggest that their ethnicity might have influenced the representations, not just the gender. So perhaps the reason that these women are represented in quite a stereotypical way and as being just involved in domestic life might be because they are also from ethnic minority backgrounds, and in particular because they are from a country within Africa. However, the women within the advert are seen as quite strong. Claudia is carrying quite a heavy bucket, the rest of the women are pumping water, it looks quite physically demanding. Because women make up the vast majority of the characters within the advert, and because the camera is tracking alongside Claudia, following her and her journey, it does suggest that women are important, and particularly important to this community, playing a vital role in collecting water for the village. The close-ups of her face make her dominate in the frame, and again that adds to her sense of importance. And she has really quite a confident facial expression and body language, which makes her seem like a very independent and powerful young woman. The advert features quite stereotypical representations of places within Africa, the dusty roads, and we see some fields in the distance, quite a dry landscape with very little greenery, and it seems like quite a harsh environment where people are quite isolated. And perhaps they've used these representations to create what Stuart Hall calls a shared conceptual roadmap. It means it's easily and instantly identifiable to an audience. The stereotypical representations of the location help the audience to immediately understand the advert, the people, and what their problems are. The use of her name, Claudia, in the title of the advert, and the use of her image on a large amount of the other materials relating to this campaign connotes to the audience that she is a real person. And actually you could get background information about Claudia through the Wateraid website and through their Twitter page as well. And so it kind of is there to make the representations within the advert feel as real as possible. It creates more realism within the narrative. And all of that is done to try and engage the target audience more and make them more likely to donate money. Gauntlet might say that Claudia acts as a role model for the target audience. We see her as aspirational, someone who has overcome a difficult background to be able to provide for herself and probably her family as well. And this independent, powerful representation might be a way of encouraging the audience to see what could happen if they donated their money. In terms of how audiences might respond to these representations, don't forget it does entirely depend on the audience, their cultural background, their social background, their historical background. So many modern audiences would have quite liked this advert. It was quite different and unconventional in comparison to other charity adverts, and some audiences would have quite liked this because it was very different from those quite tragic, tear-jerking charity ads from previous years. Some audiences might have really enjoyed the fact that this advert had a more positive representation of people from within African communities, and they perhaps would have felt quite strongly that they wanted more representations like this. Some audiences might have seen the advert and taken a much more oppositional reading. They may have felt, well, if Claudia and all her friends are having so much fun and they don't look very needy, then why should I donate money? So some people might have rejected the messages within the advert or really not understood them, and have felt that their money could be better used elsewhere. Some audiences might feel that women are still being shown in very domestic roles, and they might feel the advert is still quite sexist. So depending on their views about gender, they may respond to this advert differently as well.